Our scripture this morning is from the book of Peter. This point must not be overlooked, dear friends. In the eyes of the Most High, one day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like a day. God does not delay in keeping the promise as some mean delay. Rather, God shows you generous patience, desiring that no one perish, but that all come to repentance. The day of our God will come like a thief, and on that day, the heavens will vanish with a roar, the elements will catch fire and fall apart, and the earth and all its works will be destroyed in the flames. Since everything is to be destroyed in this way, what holy and devoted lives you should lead. Thank you. Look for the coming of the day of God and try to hasten it along. Because of it, the heavens will be destroyed in flames, and the elements will melt away in a blaze. But what we await are new heavens and a new earth, where, according to the promise, God's justice will reside. So, beloved, while waiting for this, make every effort to be found at peace and without stain or defilement in God's sight. Consider our God's patience as your opportunity for salvation. Ancient words for our modern day consideration.
So I want to start with a question I pose to you. Just what is your dreaming like? What state is your imaginative capacity in these days? Your ability to dream of a more beautiful, better world? You can choose whether or not to take up that question. You might want to set it aside if this isn't the time for that. But if you do, consider with me, how easy or difficult is it for you to imagine a better world? Does that seem impossible right now? Or are the dreams just flowing one by one? Natasha Womack, who is a scholar and a creative who centers her work on Afrofuturism, tells a story about a time that she was invited to a 5th grade elementary school art class in Chicago. So Afrofuturism, if you have not heard of that, is really an artistic, creative movement that centers African-descended people in stories, imagination, creating and imagining a better world. And there are authors, sort of one of the founders, in a way, Octavia Butler, you might have heard of her, Parable of the Sower, and others, musicians, artists, politicians, activists, all who believe in a better future for African-descended folks, and all of us. So when Womack was asked to talk to this 5th grade class about Afrofuturism, she began by asking them a question, like, what are you imagining in the future? What do you think, what would you like your world to look like? And she expected these, imaginative 5th graders to come up with all sorts of things, going to Mars, aliens, who knows? But to a child, they said, well, I'd just like there to be less gun violence. I'd like to have a safe neighborhood. I just want there to be less violence. And so she realized that their imaginations were constrained by their present circumstances, violence that they witnessed in their neighborhoods, or violence that was portrayed by the media about their neighborhoods being violent places. And so she began to kind of peel back the layers a little bit, and she said, okay, well, you're not experiencing violence 24/7. So think about those times when you don't see that. How does that feel? And how can you grow that feeling? And so slowly they begin to say, well, I'd like to be able to play outside all the time and feel safe, or I just want people to be kind to one another. And so she went on to talk about how music and art and writing can help them imagine and express their imagination for a better world. And just before the bell rang in that class, a little girl sort of raised her hand and she said, so are you trying to tell us that we can use our imaginations and we can create the kind of world we want to see, and that just doing that can help change the world around us? Is that what you're saying? And Womack said, yes, that's what I'm trying to say. And just like those 10-year-olds, I think our capacity to imagine a better world can really be constrained by our present circumstances. I mean, we know how big and how intractable and how wicked and messy a lot of the problems are in the world. I mean, how do you untangle Israel and Gaza right now? You know, there's deep-rooted diseases of racism and colonialism with all of their nefarious effects. And the degradation of the climate, I mean, the most global problem of all. How do you dream of a better world while contemplating a future climate that is inhospitable to human life? What do we do in that? Do we even need to dream of a better world? I think so. I think we can't relinquish our capacity to dream, that we need to recover it, that we need it to live. And for many years, that proverb, I think it's Proverbs 29, has been playing in my mind: without a vision, the people perish. It's like, it's our capacity to hope in a brighter future, a more beautiful world in the present, that can animate us and keep us going and keep us moving. Because if you've ever sort of lost that sense of hope about the future, you might have experienced, like me, that sort of feeling of being paralyzed, of sort of suspended in motion and struggling to find motivation just for the ordinary things. Like, what's the point? But I think our imagination about the future is in many ways more about the present and about how we are living right now. Angela Davis, who's a prophet I've come to know through Babs, sort of said, and this is a paraphrase, in order to work toward a better future, we need to believe that future is possible. When I was working at the seminary, I was helping to lead a program called Pastoral Leadership in Public Life. And we had a new cohort or group of pastors, and one of the first things we did was take them on a hike at the Red Bluff Preserve. And that is a park or nature preserve in East Austin. It's not an official city park, but it's really sacred to a lot of people who've done a lot of work to make that nice. And so we wanted our folks to kind of see Austin, see cities in a different way, from a different perspective. So we invited Tane Ward, who is an Indigenous scholar. He helped get Indigenous Peoples Day established in Austin. We invited him to take us on this hike. It was actually his suggestion to go there. And along the way, he would talk about sort of the deep history of this place, of 10,000 years of human activity and migration and trade routes and the lushness of the flora and the fauna, how beautiful it was, and this landscape, which had been decimated, but was beginning to return through small efforts of a handful of people. And then we got to kind of the crest of the hill under kind of a stand of trees, and he asked us to close our eyes and imagine. He's like, okay, just imagine 5 years in the future, 10 years in the future, what could this place be like? Imagine this better. Imagine our world better. And to a one, we were all blank. We couldn't imagine that. And so he was surprised, and he said, like, well, isn't that your job as pastors? What are you doing up there isn't it your job to help people see a better world and to live into that vision? That's sobering. Well, and then he offered what I found a really helpful suggestion, which was to, okay, if you can't imagine a better world 10 years from now, well then try 100, or try 1,000, or try 10,000. And that just sort of unlocked something for all of us. It just released us a little bit, and we began sort of as a group to just see this lush, green world full of bird song, and we began to feel that better world inside of us, like this peace came over us. And that made me think of the scripture that we read today, that Noel read from 2 Peter, and that suggestion of 1,000 years. And my translation is a little bit different, but just a little bit before that particular reading starts, it says in this letter, "Scoffers will come saying, 'Where is the promise of God's coming? For ever since our ancestors died, all things continue as they were from the beginning of creation.'" And then it continues on, "But by the word, by the Logos," that Jim talked about last week, "by the Logos, beloved, do not ignore this. The heavens existed long ago, and earth was formed out of water. Do not ignore this one fact, beloved, that with God, one day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like one day. God is not slow to keep promises, as some think of slowness." And this letter was most likely written in the 2nd century by someone who wasn't actually named Peter. And many early Christians believed that this sort of second coming of Christ, when all things would be made new, that when justice would reign on the earth, when there would be this beautiful world that we're all longing for, that was coming very quickly. And then you get to the 2nd century and you realize, okay, that hasn't happened. So that's a little bit of a crisis in some ways that Peter is trying to address. Peter. And the author says that the promise holds, but you just have to think about it differently. 1,000 years is like one day. And I think that speaks to something true, that we humans are really time-bound, very time-bound. Our Earth has existed for billions of years, and we've existed for hundreds of thousands of years. But maybe we need to release ourselves a little bit from time, just in order to be able to dream. And that's something that I love about speculative fiction, also known as science fiction. That is my favorite genre. Please come talk to me about it afterwards. I have so many suggestions. But this, projecting into the future allows us to dream a different world that isn't constrained by what we see right now. It can help us think differently, actually, about the present. So I imagine some of you know the author Ursula K. Le Guin. So looking, I see some slow heads nodding. Okay. So she's one of the first female science fiction writers, along with Octavia Butler. And she is known for many things, but among them her book, The Left Hand of Darkness. And that's a story that she tells about an emissary, a human emissary from Earth that goes to a foreign world to establish diplomatic relations. And on this world, the people there have fluid gender. Like they switch from one gender to another gender, and it's not really a predictable thing. And anyone could have a child, become pregnant based on what gender they're expressing at that moment. And so this emissary gets to know one of those representatives, and through that relationship finds themselves first, uncomfortable, but then sort of shifting and changing, and their ideas about like gender are changing. And this book was written in 1969. So she was writing in 1969. And that really did help other people to imagine differently. Obviously, it has not made complete impact since we're having those conversations about gender today still. But her ability to kind of suspend time and space by putting this on another world allowed us to think differently in the present moment. Of course, writers' imaginations are not free from the constraints of their culture, or their imaginations are not unlimited. Many science fiction authors have sort of reinscribed ideas of empire and patriarchy and conquest and extraction of resources. But there are a lot of people, a lot of authors writing who are imagining and dreaming differently. And many of those authors are writing in Afrofuturism or Asian futurism or indigenous futurism. They're coming not from sort of a white center perspective, from different perspectives that help us to dream differently about the present moment. When Ursula Le Guin was talking about this genre of speculative fiction, a lot of folks have adopted speculative fiction because of those problems with some of the science fiction. She said this, "To me, the important thing is not to offer any specific hope of betterment, but by offering an imagined but persuasive alternative reality to dislodge the mind, and so the reader's mind, from the lazy, timorous habit of thinking that the way we live now is the only way people can live. It is that inertia that allows the institutions of injustice to continue unquestioned." And this I love. She says, "We live in capitalism. Its power seems inescapable. So did the divine right of kings. Any human power can be resisted and changed by human beings. Resistance and change often begin in art." So I think for some of us, and I include myself in this, that we might feel at this moment the ending of worlds, of sort of a future climate that's habitable, of the ending of democracy, perhaps, or we fear that that's the case. But, and all of that, there's no denying sort of the grimness of a lot of that. What I want to say alongside that is there are people right now living who have lived through the ending of worlds. Think about people indigenous to these lands, their ancestors living through that. And those folks are still dreaming and still imagining and still singing for a better world. I haven't personally lived through the ending of a world. I don't know any recent ancestors who have, maybe deep in time. But there have been at least a few moments in my life where I have come to this sort of all is lost moment, where it felt like things were ending. One kind of the trajectory of human civilization and sort of this imagination of a better world, that felt like that was dying. Another time, a deeply held dream. And at those moments when I sort of looked all of that in the face, which is terrifying, it's sort of like looking into an abyss, I was sort of inexplicably met by this deep feeling of peace, of just being loved. I kind of liken this to this sort of idea that like underneath everything is this beautiful song that's being sung continuously. And sometimes we get to hear that song. And it's a song that says, what you see, what you imagine isn't all there is. There's more to the story. It's a bigger story. And there is a love that is deeper and wider and more enduring than all that you can imagine. And you're included in that love. All of us are included in that love. And that love is the dream. I was thinking back to those 10-year-olds. I can really relate to them. It's a lot easier for me to imagine what I don't want than what I do want. But I think what we don't want can be a good place to begin. I remember my early 20s driving on Mopac. This was like after grad school when I was going to my job, and so I had this kind of regular drive. Just all of a sudden being overwhelmed by this feeling of like utter alienation. Like, what is this life? And why are we all in these individual little metal boxes, driving in these concrete highways? Why is this what we've created? I mean, and I still get hit by that. Just a couple months ago, I was driving into Austin and the overpass was like, what is this? This is ugly. Why is this how we live? And so from that, I started having this dream grow in me of like, you know what I dream of is a world without cars. Not even a world of electric cars, but just a world without cars. Yes. And that's what I don't want. But what that really means of what I want is like, I want a world that's centered around something different, that's centered around relationships, that's centered around community. We don't all need our individual metal moving boxes or our espresso machines or our backyard playscapes. Like we could share some playscapes. And there could just be a different pattern of living. And a couple of people came up to me after the first service and one said, you know what I want? I was like, I want a world without leaf blowers. Yes! That is a good dream. And another was like, I want to look up and see the stars at night. I want a darker night sky. Yeah. And you know, I think these seeds of dreams are important. These dreams can keep growing within us. I mean, I felt more peaceful just having that dream in the present moment. I think sometimes we just need that seed, not the whole schematics, like of a new and better world, but just an image or a metaphor or a melody. And the scriptures are filled with them, right? We have communion today, a wide open welcome table, filled and overflowing with food and drink for everyone. And those who are least honored in society have the places of the most honor at that table. And you know, a city with the river of the water of life flowing through it, and a tree with the leaves of healing for all nations, lions lying down with lambs, swords turning into plowshares, all of these beautiful, beautiful images and beautiful songs, especially during this season. It's hard to keep our capacity for imagining a beautiful world going. I think the alternative is to remain sort of suspended in motion or to allow other dreams to dominate. We know there are a lot of dream makers whose dreams we don't want. We sometimes just need a longer time horizon to free us from the constraints of our present moment, or to hear other dreamers who can help us dream differently. Sometimes we just need to start with what we don't want and peel back the layers. We just need that small seed, that image, that melody, that metaphor, that feeling of peace. Birds singing. Do you remember during the pandemic when you could hear birds singing again? People are like, are the birds singing louder? No, we're just quieter. It's like, Angela Davis said that, I don't think we have any alternative other than remaining optimistic. Optimism is an absolute necessity, even if it's only optimism of the will, as Knisely, an Italian philosopher, said, and pessimism of the intellect. I think we dream in defiance that what we see is all there is or can be. I think we just dream sometimes by sheer force of will. We dream and keep that seed of hope growing within us. We dream of that beautiful world. And that can change us right now and give us agency. And we keep dreaming for however long it takes, even if it's 1,000 years. I invite you now to your own reflections on these words.